Oh, that's funny. Oh, we're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Game Audio Hour, number 80. What is this one?
Is it 81?
Is it, or is it 82? I can't remember what we had last week. Why don't I know that? It's 81. There it is in the show notes. It's our weekly podcast where Kyle tries to guess the number. For some reason, I can never remember. It's because I'm old and my memory sucks. That's a true statement. And this is where we talk about creative ideas and the latest techniques and project experiences and audio secrets. And here's where you're going to find your in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. Mike!
How are you doing? I'm very excited to be here on episode 80 plus or minus 2. We have some nice rainy weather outside, which for us is a fun novelty.
Oh, that is super nice. I was inside all day and then came out to hurry to get here so I could do the show, and discovered my car was freezing cold and wet, and I thought, what is that? I don't know the definition of that anymore. How about you, Alex? Do you know what is freezing cold and wet? You get 2 guesses.
Seattle. Apparently, according to Sean LaVale, it's raining and cold in Seattle, so I guess that would count as cold and wet. No? Yeah. Am I wrong?
Yeah. You get 2. You want to go for another one?
Well, actually, today is it's actually a public holiday today. Today is Culture Day. Japan has a day for culture. So,
whose culture?
I don't know. Just culture. Just
they don't define it. They don't say it's Japanese Culture Day, or
no, it's just Culture Day. Huh. So we're all.
It could be like a yogurt culture or something, right?
that's right. It's let's see. It's what is it? LG41 Culture Day today, isn't it? Get some of that lacto something bacillus.
You're frightening me. Let's talk about drums.
Actually, drums.
That was a good segue.
So we were in the well, firstly, let's just say hello to our all the wonderful people who have given us their time to join us in the chat room. We have aka ADR. Which we need a better nickname for other than aka_ADR.
He gets Lumina, Matt, every time we have a show.
I know. Lumina, Matt M. Hoffman, Michael, and Sean LaVale in rainy Seattle. Yeah. So here we are. Today, we were tossing around some ideas for topics, and it occurred to me that we've never actually done a dedicated episode about drums. Now you're all thinking, okay, time to tune out. But it's useful for you too, because today we're not just talking about any kind of drums, we're talking about any kind of drums. So we're talking about electronic drums, acoustic drums, and orchestral / cinematic / Michael Gordon Shapiro drums. Basically tools, tips, any ways, any useful ideas, useful plugins, useful resources for getting that drum sound. So where should we begin? Because this is kind of a broad topic.
Which drum sound?
We could take a historical approach and very briefly whiz through the history of simulated drum technology and talk about some of the features that evolved. I'm sure that Alex could riff for 40 minutes on the Alesis HR16 if necessary.
Actually, I think it might be good to bring it back to game audio. I think firstly, let's just start with as you know here at Game Audio, we like to have a soft topic and a hard topic. So let's start with the soft. What are generally, where do you find yourself using drums in music, other than obviously for achieving a certain kind of genre sound? Are there other applications to drums or things that you find useful for using drums in game soundtracks and game sound effects? I find if you're doing sort of fighting game style sounds like punch sounds and sort of body impacts and stuff like that, the first place I generally go is to, like a snare drum or a kick drum, or at least synthesizing that with a similar kind of synthesis structure as you would have with those kinds of drums. What do you guys use drums for other than in music? Do you have any other kinds of applications that you like to use drums for game sound and sound effects?
I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever used drums to like pad a punch or anything like that. That's a good idea. I can't think of a time when I've used it for something other than music.
I think on one of the rare occasions where I was doing some sound design, I think I used a kick drum. I was doing some sound design for a mini game online where robots were duking it out. I think I used a kick drum for some of the impact sounds because I just liked the way it sounded.
Yeah, drums are really, actually, very, very useful because basically, you have if you think the way that a drum skin works, you've got this big round kind of surface area that's kind of modulating the airwaves like this, and so it starts very, if you hit, it'll vibrate very, very quickly at first and very rapidly, and then slowly sort of start to resonate in itself and slow down like this, and so creating any kind of drum sound where you compress a wave and then slowly release the wavelength as you go along, together with some kind of transient, as in most cases it would be, some kind of beta hitting a surface. In the case of an acoustic drum, you have a slight transient sound from that impact. That basic understanding of the way that a drum sound works in order to give you that punch and that feel is actually extremely useful for producing any kind of impact sound. So breaking it into the components of like the transient and the released body with the wavelength stretching out as it goes over time, you can use just that knowledge to create any kind of sound effect that involves, a percussive impact.
Yeah.
One
go ahead, Mike.
I'll be super brief then. One thing worth remembering, especially if you're talking about this overlap between music and sound design, is that most modern drum modules and drug modules will have the ability to detune individual drums and just take the pitch down, and this can have remarkable impact, no pun intended, on the timbre of the drum itself. So you might have a kick that's sort of pleasant and kind of beefy, but not necessarily thunderous, and you just find the dial that alters pitch. And if the plugin is sophisticated, it might do some on-the-fly resampling, or it may just be slowing it down. But suddenly, with a little bit of tweaking, you may find that becomes this deep, earth-shattering rumble that has a lot of almost kind of like sub-50 hertz content. And there's a lot of room for experimentation if you take the time to really get to know your drum soundware.
So Sean LaVale said he uses battery for a ton of sound effects, and I do too in a similar way. I use this beautiful beast right here. Have I shown this before?
What is that?
It's my boombox. Boom. It's called the Moontech controller. Look at its name. It's beautiful. Moontech Studios. Anyway, it's a bunch of video game buttons. So you really go crazy.
Now, there's a company.
Huh?
Oh, go ahead.
So I load this up with a bunch of samples, and this is the modern way of playing drums. But you can load this up with a bunch of samples, punches and kicks and stuff, and I do that, and then I just play along with the video. But I was thinking about what I use this for mostly, and it's metals. Like if I've got to get some sort of rhythm going on with some metals for something, even sound design, I'll do that. Not drums specifically, but some kind of metals. Like I have a whole library of different things, from anvils to chains to whatever, and I'll load all that stuff up and just start coming up with combinations. That's the closest I do for that kind of percussiveness for sound design.
Have you heard of the? I think it's called the MIDI Fighter. I think that might be the name. I'm pretty sure it's MIDI Fighter. Can somebody look that up? It's a small. It's a 16. It's called MIDI Fighter. Like a 16-pad device with arcade buttons, just like yours. They all light up. That's like that. The whole point of the devices.
You've been taken over by Daleks.
You can't hear me?
Oh, I can hear you, and you sound like a robot about to take over the Earth. So
it's a pretty wicked effect. It's too bad it's not intentional.
I know. I didn't want to stop him because I'm like, that is badass right there. I don't know what he's doing, but it's really cool.
It's like a weird ring modulation effect of some kind.
What's he doing?
Can you hear me?
It's probably some synth he created 20 years ago, and it's just now getting its revenge.
I think you're back, Alex.
Am I
we
back?
can hear you now.
Am I caught up?
Yeah.
MIDI Fighter. Check out this in the. I just posted a link in the chat room. It's a 16 button sort of sample triggering device. It's actually for DJs. It's a bit of a the novelty of it is that you can pick it up and it has an accelerometer inside it, and you can use the movement of the accelerometer to also link together to MIDI parameters to do stuff with automating your filters or effects or whatever, which is a bit kind of gimmicky. I mean, I don't know that when it's for DJs, so I guess they want to have more sort of interactivity with their crowd and show people that they're actually triggering stuff right in front of their eyes instead of down on some desk that the people can't actually see. But yeah, it actually reminds me a bit of that nice device that you just showed on the screen there.
Thank you. This was made by Travis Chen. He was awesome. It's got purple and blue and red buttons, and it's so cool. But I'm trying to think of the software that I use with it more than not. And it's called. I'm going to embarrass myself because I've never known how to say this correctly. It's called Monome or Monome. I don't know what people say.
How do you spell it?
Monome. I'm going to Google some stuff and get people some downloads. .org, and they have got so much software out there. You can do some amazing stuff if you've got a grid controller like this. Coming into the chat room right now. But you know what? Without using drums for sound design, we use the heck out of drums for composition. Mike, what's your favorite library for drums for composition?
Well, I guess it depends what genre of drums we're talking about. Loosely speaking, when I think of drums, I break it down into either acoustic drums, kind of rock and roll stuff, electronic, techno type drums, orchestral percussion, which isn't always drums, but we'll just sloppily throw it in that category, and then weird experimental noise, I don't know what that is, kind of drums. When it comes to straight-ahead acoustic drums, I'm fond of Superior Drummer 2, which is made by, oh gosh, I forgot the company, but they also make Easy Drummer. Does anyone have a Tune Track? That's it. It's by Tune Track. Yeah. And I really like Superior Drummer for acoustic drums. There's a lot of detail. They've got a large number of mics, so you can really adjust the sound. You've got simulated mic bleed through. I guess it's actual bleed through. It's just been recorded. And there's a little mixer, which I occasionally use to use some of their own plugins. And just aesthetically, I really like the sound of the drums. When BFD came out, I was really excited because that was the first time I'd heard of that paradigm where you had a heavily multi-sampled acoustic drum library and with multiple mic positions. I just was not crazy about the actual timbre of their drums, and I really tried using it for a long time. Superior Drummer rolled along, and I thought, here's the same idea, but it's just pleasing to the ear. They have a lot of different libraries, and you can purchase extra ones. They've got a really cool one that's kind of household objects, found object drums, which are neat when you want something edgy and atypical sounding. So that's probably my favorite. With I think the default set that comes with Logic is a good fallback when I'm looking for something a little simpler.
What about you, Alex? Do you design your own drums, or do you use any kind of like pre-created samples?
I mostly make my own. However, if you're looking for that sort of legacy tone from a certain vintage drum machine when you're doing electronic stuff, one resource that I swear by is Gold Baby. There's a guy in New Zealand. If you just search Gold Baby, you'll find his sample sets. And he's a guy in New Zealand with this huge studio, and he records vintage drum machines through a whole bunch of outboard. And he's even gone as far, I think I talked about him before, he's even gone as far as actually having dub plates, having LP records made of drum machine sounds and then recording the output from the LP record for sort of that authentic tone. Nice. Yeah, his stuff is really excellent. So for all electronic drums where I'm not making my own, then I will use his stuff. For making my own drums, I use Sonic Charge Microtonic a lot, which is an ancient Swedish drum synthesizer. It's an 8-voice drum synthesizer. It's a plugin, obviously. However, even though it's so old, it's just got just the right amount of functionality to get good sounds really quick. It's not so specific to a certain kind of tone that, it only gives you a certain style of tone, like a lot of the 808 or the 909 synth simulators. Like D16 Group has a whole bunch of things like Nephaton and Ozone and strangely named 808, 626, and 909 emulating plugins. Those are great. However, they'll give you just that tone, and if you're after that tone, then that's great. But then, it becomes questionable. Why would you resort to using a CPU-heavy plugin if you're wanting to really tweak a 909 kick to get it just right? Surely there's an easier way and a cheaper way to do it if you're looking for if you go out looking for samples to get you that sound. However, there's another one which I used to use called Audio Realism Drum. No, it's not Audio Realism. Oh, geez, can't remember. Never mind. Anyway, I sold that one, so forget that one. So, yeah. Or the other good thing that you can do is obviously using any kind of proper subtractive synthesis or FM synthesis or any kind of versatile synth plugin to just basically roll your own from scratch. And I find myself that rolling your own, like making your own drum sounds, is not only is it fun, and not only do you get the ability to sort of tweak it just right from the source instead of using a whole range of transient shapers and EQs and compressors to try and shape a sound. You get it right at the source. So it's good in that regard, but it's also good because it really teaches you a lot about how a drum sound is formed, and how you actually create a certain kind of drum tone. And that, of course, is really useful when you're doing sound effects production, to sort of understand that, okay, this is what is making that feel, and this is giving that feel. One other sort of secondary advantage of using a synth plugin is that often with drum samples, depending on the kind of music, you may not want the drum sample to sound exactly the same every time it's triggered. That is a sample, so of course it's going to sound the same. And of course we're kind of, nowadays with electronic music, we're sort of accustomed to having this very, very consistent sound with our drums because they're all coming from samples. However, if you're using analog emulating plug-in synthesizers, obviously every time it's triggered it's going to be slightly different. That's not always good, as I found a few months ago when I did the KVR One Synth Challenge competition, where you have one synth that you have to use for everything. And in that case, I was trying to do drums with this kind of unstable plugin, and every time it would trigger, it would sound much too different from what I wanted, so you couldn't get that sort of solid rhythm underneath the song. So in that case, it's not so good. But if you're like a lot of the Yuhi synthesizers allow you to actually set how much of that slop, how much of that sort of variability comes in from the synthesizer. You can actually tone it down to make it more consistent with each hit. Matt M in the chat room mentioned of a really interesting technique to, if you have one drum sample and you're wanting to create variations. He said a trick for creating multi-velocity samples out of a single drum hit is to save iterations of the hit while deleting the first peak of each successive iteration. Okay, that's actually for multi-velocity. One thing that you can do is you can actually randomize the pitch of the tail of a drum very, very slightly, but separate the transient from the beginning if you're using a sample. So you have the transient on top of the tail and randomize the pitch of the tail but keep the transient consistent, but only randomize it very, very slightly. That will give you, with one sample, it takes a little bit of engineering, but if it's an important sample that you need variation from, that will give you very, very subtle variation which sounds quite natural. That's a little bit different to what Matt M was talking about.
Very cool. So when can we talk about live drums?
So let's talk about live drums.
Actually, I interrupt myself because there's a library that I've been using, and even Mike asked what it was. So that's my level of I must have picked a good sound piece of software if Mike asks me what it is. What is that? Because I send Mike a bunch of turds. I don't know if you guys know out there, but I basically poop out music, and Mike makes me sound amazing. And so I sent Mike something, and there were drums, and he said, "What is that library?" And I thought, gee, that's not something I expected to hear, given the. So that library that I used when I was doing that stuff, Mike, and I told Mike, and so I want to spread it here, is Native Instruments Action Strikes. I think that thing sounds fantastic. I like their whole action series. I like their action strings. I think it's cool. But their drums sound fantastic. I use that. So I have a template that doesn't use up much RAM. Therefore, that's where the poop comes from. It's my poop template, and I can write really fast, and I don't have to use up a lot of resources. I don't have to freeze tracks and spend time getting out of my head to do engineering, which is what I don't want to do when I'm writing something. And Action Strikes is in that template because it's really kind of low on the resources, and I love it. That's what I wanted to say. Then I wanted to talk about live drums.
Before you go on, there's another acoustic drum library which I'm not sure that you guys will be aware of, but they're doing some really interesting stuff and very economical. It's called Drumdrops. Have you ever heard of Drumdrops?
Mm.
It's really good. Drumdrops, I think they're a UK group. They sample a bunch of. They have a range of like acoustic drum kits that they sample for, but they give a whole range of additional options that you can purchase. So you can actually tailor your purchase from them for your needs. They have basic multi-velocity packs, so you just buy a pack of like stepped multi-velocity drum samples, and in those cases, they actually offer you a whole range of different formats. So you can just load it into Contact or whichever Geist or whichever of these sample, even Renoise, whichever one you use. They actually have two types. There's a multi-velocity pack, which has, I think, I'm not sure how many levels, maybe 16 levels of velocity for each percussion instrument. But they also have like a basic pack, which has only got 3. That's really useful, depending on what your needs are. If you're making some kind of really dirty, destroyed kind of breakbeat kind of thing, you don't need 16 levels of velocity sensitivity. So in that kind of case, you may want to opt for their very, very economical, like just 3-layer packs. They're quite cheap and they sound fantastic, and they'll just give you 3 velocity levels for each, so you can create those kind of breakbeats really, really easy where you don't need that sensitivity. They also have, it's called Drumdrops.
Drumdrops. Can we sing it? Drumdrops. Drumdrops. I don't know what that would sound like.
You can sing it, Carl.
No, I can't. You just heard me try.
The other thing that they do, as well as the multi-velocity ones and the basic velocity packs, they also have a contact instrument, I think, which will actually load much more complicated data, which is kind of expensive. But check out their stuff. There's some good stuff, and their site's sort of easy to use. And yeah, so we'll look at the chat room, guys. See, do drums and people chime in. See, I told you.
You know what? I want to take 2 minutes to make a public announcement, and then go to our sponsor, and then come back to drums. Ableton has announced 9.5, which I'm super excited about because, oh my God, they made track coloring automatic. You cannot imagine how excited I am that if I decide that I want that track to be blue and I start recording into it, everything's going to show up as blue. That's a pretty big deal to me because I like art. Pro Tools has announced 12.3, and you won't believe what they've done. They have added automatic fading, so when you add something in it, you can create these fades. You can set their millisecond beginning and end, and you can apply them through your whole project. Yes, something that's existed in DAW since, I don't know, the Flintstones, but still, they did it, and it's amazing. Thank you, Pro Tools, amongst other things. But the big thing about Ableton is they included this thing on their latest release called Link, where people can play together from distances. They can play together on Ableton, and some people are on iPads using disparate applications that have nothing to do with Ableton. And everybody's in sync and participating in this kind of get-together. I don't think it's kind of like Alex can be in Japan and I can be in America and we're perfectly in time. I don't know how that's going to happen. But their description, especially in a movie, showed everybody in a room, and then eventually they just closed the laptop altogether that had Ableton on it, and they were all on devices and playing in time with what's going on. So it's pretty cool. So check out Ableton's got some big features that have come out. Pro Tools, I'm kind of picking on them because they released a lot more than just auto fading for 12.3, which is soon to be out. Now, with that said, it's sponsor time. Before we move on to the next thing, it's the half hour. I should do sponsor stuff at the half hour. Thank you, Isotope, for supporting the show. We're super stoked that you do that. And letting everybody know that Isotope Ozone 7, and do any of us not have Ozone somewhere in our process? Oh, Alex, put your hand down. The rest of us, non-Luddites, definitely have. Hey, look, I got horns. That's cool. My hair's got horns. The rest of us are using Isotope. The only reason Alex isn't using it is because never mind. So moving on.
This will be good. This will be good. No, you didn't get
it. I'm getting you out of trouble. So Ozone 7 is $50 off right now. I don't know how long that sale. And Ozone 7 Advanced is also $50 off. So for $199, you can get Ozone 7. Man, that is amazing. Anyway, Mike and I could wax poetically about Ozone, I think, right, Mike?
Not poetically. Kyle, just to make sure that we've got the numbers down, Ozone 7 is a discount? Because that's the one that, I don't know if that's been released yet, or has it just been released?
Yeah, I'm looking at it on their website. You go to their shop, isotope.com/en/store, and scroll down to Ozone 7. Regularly $249 is at $199 right now.
That is amazing, and I hope that there's some love for people upgrading from Ozone 6, since some of us bought it very recently. But yes, even if Isotope was not our sponsor, we would have nothing but good things to say about Ozone. I use it all the time. It's all I can do to stop myself from using it right now when I don't even have a DAW in front of me. That's how much. That's
Mike's words are backed up by proof. If you roll back through any of our shows, I think if you just listen to 10 minutes of every show, Ozone's going to show up like 10 times.
If I ever sound distracted during a show, it's because I've opened another window and I'm reading the Ozone 6 manual just for fun.
That's so true.
Software it is.
And when Alex sounded like a Dalek, whatever you choose to call it earlier, he was using Ozone Break Tweaker to mess with his sound. So thank you, Ozone, for the support of the show. So
I have
now,
a question for you. To kick off your, no pun intended, subject on live drums, I want to throw this out to you and challenge you a little bit. What does the game audio composer, the modern game audio composer, care about live drums? Why, with this slew of samples and synthetic drums and whatever kind of weird primitive stuff Alex likes to use available to us, so much drum content is free with typical DAWs. Why don't we just send all the live drummers packing, Kyle? Why do we need them at all?
Oh my God.
I mean, if you're a caveman like me and you're using like synth plugins or something, geez, didn't I notice the Fairlight?
Let me give you a $50. Who doesn't have $50? $50. Go get yourself a Badron, or however you say that crazy ass name. You can pitch that thing. All you gotta do is hit it. That's it. You don't have to have any talent whatsoever. Hold it up. Put a microphone to it. Okay, you need a microphone as well. Put your iPhone on record. Grab that crazy frame drum. Let's use the American anglicized version. Bang it with a fish. And then pitch it all kinds of different ways, and you'll never buy another taiko library ever in the history of ever. That is a true statement.
Does it have to be like? Does it need to be a Japanese fish, or to get like a taiko drum? What is it? Any kind of fish? Okay. I mean,
it depends on the genre of music that you're writing for. If you're doing a Japanese RPG, I would definitely recommend some sort of Japanese fish that you bang on this drum. But if you're doing if you're doing something from, let's say, a Viking, get a herring, smack it with a herring, and your sound, it's an amazing experience. When you're holding that frame and you smack that thing, it's unbelievable. And you can press as many keyboard keys as you want, or you can tap as many pads as you want. But if you smack a frame drum, you are going to love the sound of that. Then, okay, take your iPhone recording of it, Make sure, you're going to want to check it out. Make sure you got a good one. You might have to record 2 or 3 times to get it right. But then push it into your DAW and start pitching it. Go anywhere you want. Tycho libraries are just everywhere. I mean, they're so ubiquitous, they're free practically. And yet, you still have to sit on a keyboard and recreate this kind of performance. You could do that with a frame drum. Just smack it a few times. Collect a bunch of samples. Just really get the performance in it as well. Now, on top of that, if I'm going to get on my soapbox and not get off, I have a complete kit sitting out there, and I'm not even a drummer, but I sit down at that thing all the time and have a blast. I have gotten more inspirations recently, frankly, because I've had to write a lot of battle music, from sitting down at my drums and just beating out a pattern that I'm recording on my cell phone that's on the other side of the room because it's so damn loud, and going, okay, that's fantastic. I went out and bought some MIDI triggers so that I could attach them to the heads of my drums, and now I'm playing directly into my DAW, and it's recording all of that MIDI. And then I go and I switch the notes, and I'm Neil Peart. It's kind of like I got a Neil Peart mouse, right? So I'm like, I show up as like Ringo Starr, who's quite frankly a very good drummer. He's like a metronome. But then I start switching notes, and I start copying and pasting, and I become a Neil Peart. And then I throw it into my library, and I go, oh my God, this Action Drums that's doing this thing is like, well, Action Drums isn't a good example because I steal a lot of their rhythms. But when I run it into other libraries, I'm like, there's my rhythm, but now it's being played on Tycho drums or something. And then I can go to the frame drum, record my own sounds, stick those samples right into Ableton, and go, look at, now I've created my own. Everything is organic. That is fantastic. And a frame drum's going to cost you what on Amazon? $20? $30? I'm going to go look it up while you guys talk.
Well, to put a little wrapper around everything you've said in that delightful, surprisingly fish-oriented lecture. So use number one for live drums, why we care, this is answering my own question, is that you can get your own drums and be your own musician and experiment, hopefully not actually with fish, and come up with some sounds that might feel more organic or live or just different from, as Kyle said, the same old Tycho libraries that everybody's using.
Yeah.
What I find funny is I thought I was setting up a pathway for you to wax eloquent about the value of live drummers or hiring musicians, and instead you kind of went a different route and said buy a drum for $50 because it doesn't require talent, which is definitely not the angle I expected. So I think it's fair to say that talent helps, and this might be a good segue point to the possibility of talking about hiring drummers or percussionists for game audio, despite the fact that we have samples of every conceivable drum. I'm pretty sure I have a Bodrum hit with a carp sample somewhere. But let's talk about the value of human musicians. Obviously, when you're doing session work, you're recording an album, you know that sometimes you want to have a live drummer, but the value might be less clear to game composers. So what can you offer us on that subject? I guess I better ask Kyle.
Oh, that absolutely, man. Hire yourself a real drummer. Don't hire me. Not have to drum for you. But so I was working on a piece very recently to this point, and I wanted to add that military snare, right? And I got my MIDI triggers on there, and I've got this really nice snare drum, but I don't know how to do that kind of continuous roll, that drummers can do. And the frank thing I said is, I got to get a drummer in here, I don't know how to do that. And then the MIDI triggers, no matter how good they are, they don't pick up at a certain granularity. And drummers can really hit that, let's just say 128, instead of 64 or 32 beats or 16 beats. They can get in there and just really just get that almost hiss of a drum. And if you want that, man, oh. Well, all about game composition. It's so great if you can get, if you're writing a bunch of orchestral stuff, get a violinist to come in and really cap it off, Get a drummer to come in and really lay down these polyrhythms that you want to add to your sound. You will explode with creativity if you're sitting around with an amazing musician, especially a drummer. And quite frankly, guys, I know 2 guys right now I could name, and I should put their links in the show notes. As a matter of fact, I will. They both have studios set up in their house so that they can work on people's stuff. And, they're offering fantastic rates so that they can, get out there because, frankly, drummers just are kind of like, what do I need that guy for? Just like Mike posed as a beginning question.
Yeah, I think that's...
Get the real talent. That's the way to go.
That sounds really great, that kind of service, because, although you guys give me a bit of flack for the fact that I keep stubbornly sticking to this kind of 1970s, 1980s technology, the reality of the matter is that not all of us have the budget. Not all of us have the space. Not all of us have the equipment. Yes, okay, let's go and sample all the different pots and pans I have in the house, hitting it with a fish, but there's a lot you can do on very, very low budget with recording, but still, especially, here I live in Japan, and our walls are paper thin. Yeah. Neighbors are just, they're just like about, I don't know, 4 centimeters away, and you can hear them sneeze and fart. And if I can hear them fart, then they can hear me hitting stuff with wet fish. So.
Record the fart. Farts are percussive. Sneezes are a one-time.
Yeah, farts don't sound good through walls. Trust me, I know that. Anyway, I think if you actually are able to do that kind of stuff with actual acoustic recordings, then by all means you should do it, because as somebody who doesn't have the means to do that kind of thing very easily, I don't have a proper studio space, and I have kids running around, and and neighbors are really close, and I can't make lots and lots of noise. It can be limiting. So if that kind of service, like you mentioned, where you can actually hire a drummer to do some stuff for you, and they just send you the output. So if you ask somebody like me, who's mostly working in the box just because of space and budget limitations, that sounds fantastic. Do you know of any other similar kinds of things for different kinds of, I don't know, like sound effects productions or other kinds of drum percussion stuff where you can get people to record for you and then just send you output that you give feedback on?
Well, that's extremely common.
Yeah.
For other instrumentalists, that there's just been an explosion of musicians who will offer remote recording services. Obviously, some people know of some of the bigger orchestral services, but there are individual players all over the place who will say, I play cello and I've got a great recording room, send me your MIDI track or send me your score and I'll lay it down. And I think percussionists and drummers must also just be everywhere.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What Mike was going to say is I can think of 1,000 non-drumming musician services. That's very interesting. I think my friends have definitely come onto something that is lacking. And there's houses, like there are houses you can go to, like Bill Ross's place. He's got 5 or 6 people in there working on all kinds of different stuff. So these places need a lot of input, a lot of projects to come in so that they can have assignments and meet their numbers at the end of the year. It's almost like somebody should create a coalition of drummers, and create a website brick and mortar that just says, here it is, here are all the different styles, because that is another major thing. The 2 guys that I'm going to mention in the show notes are 2 completely different drumming styles. Neither one of them are orchestral, but that's a good thing, because they're not limited to these kind of like on the rhythm, on the beat kind of moments. One of the guys can just rip off Foo Fighters all day, and that's a heck of a thing to do, because those are 2 great drummers in that band. And so there's no limitation to what you're going to get from the sounds from these guys.
I think if it was I think we need more of that, because I think unless you're me, not very many people in game audio would actually prefer to keep things synthetic, keep things in the box, unless you're really weird like I am. Just because, it's obvious, of course. Here we are all day sitting in front of our computer punching away at MIDI keyboards trying to get an authentic guitar sound. Why not just get somebody to come play guitar for you if you can't play guitar, like Carl Johnson? It's the same with like drums or any kind of instrument. I think most of us, as we are musicians coming into game audio, the majority of us, I assume, are musicians. That's the reason why we get into game audio. I think all of us would therefore have some experience, at least if not experience, appreciation of what an actual human performer can bring to your overall sound. So we're all, obviously, we understand the benefits of using a real performer.
And also both of these guys whose link I'm going to put in there are both game designers, so they understand what it is that needs to happen, even as far as implementation. It's a very valuable skill set that they have. Anyway, so live drummers showing up on live instruments, there's no difference. Would you turn down a violinist who showed up to say, I want to play violin on your orchestral score that's full of samples? You say, no, I don't want to. And so even though the drummer, you might think of as the drums, you might think as a rock kind of, you might have a rock kind of connotation to it. That's not the case. I mean, a tom is a tom, a snare is a snare, and there are plenty of orchestrations out there, millions in fact, that probably have some sort of percussion in them that, even though it's a 5-piece kit arranged in a rock and roll style, doesn't mean that the person will sit there and play it like they would play it for an orchestral piece on stage.
Now, I think the typical listener to the show is still going to be a little skeptical. And they may say something like, well, okay, I understand that the best solo violin libraries today are screechingly awful, and I see how a live player can make that sound better, but drums, when sampled, this person will say, sound pretty good. And when I'm sitting here tapping away a rudimentary rhythm, or maybe using the quasi-AI drummer plugin in Logic, where it can kind of spit out approximations of different drum styles, that stuff sounds pretty good, so why should I spend my hard-earned money hiring a percussionist and a drummer? And I think there's more resistance in trying to sell the value of a live drummer or percussionist. And to this justifiably skeptical listener, I will offer the following thoughts. Number one is the issue of the richness of the timbres of live drums and percussion. So have you ever tried to do a cymbal roll by putting one index finger on C sharp and another one on D sharp and just kind of simulating by tapping back and forth like Billy Joel doing Angry Young Man and just slamming those two keys? It sounds like butt most of the time. You're hearing the attack over and over again, and you sometimes get the machine gun effect, and usually you put a lot of other stuff on top of it and hope that all the person hears in the mix is the high-end wash. But if you've ever sat and heard a real cymbal roll, it's this beautiful liquid flowing sound, and you get that when you've got real instruments in the room. And just about any drum sound or percussion sound, even something as seemingly as simple as a shaker, will just sound richer and better and can produce more timbres than you're aware of than you might think. And when you have a real human being playing it, they will also have a body of training and experience to get lots of colors and shades and details out of these sounds, whether it's a drum kit or something like a taiko or toms or anything else. Toms are actually another good example. I think toms are pretty utilitarian when we use them in sampled form, but there are a lot of orchestral pieces that make really expressive use of toms. They can sound really cool, almost like baby taikos, but you need actual toms because sampling can't quite capture all the interactions of drumsticks or mallets hitting the head repeatedly. You do a flam, it is not the same thing as 3 first strikes on that drum head. So,
Mike, you bring up a great point that I wanted to make about sampled drums. There are some really good taiko libraries out there, and one of the ones that I have incorporated the stomps. I've had taiko libraries. You're thinking, of course, that's part of taiko drumming as the stomps, but some libraries don't have that in there. And then I take that a step further into the sticks. They almost all have sticks in there. But what's great about having a live drummer is that you can design how you want this to sound. Because when I've tried to use sticks from taiko drums, echoing Mike's comment, they're not quite right. It doesn't capture the rhythm as naturally as I would want it to sound. And yet with live drums, I can sit there and create that. Now my kit actually has wooden rims. It doesn't have metal rims. So I can actually kind of create that taiko sound. But you don't have to have a kit with wooden rims. You just have to have sticks that you're hitting on wood to get that sound from the sample library. And so having somebody, or having the skill yourself, because there's no shame in that, for Christ's sake. If you can play drums, That's a wonderful instrument to learn to play. I know some great sound designers who are drummers. They're not pianists or guitarists. They're drummers. Dave Rowe, who I used to work with, is one of them. Fantastic. But having that ability to learn the rudiments of drums and then playing on things. You know, my guitar is going to sound like a guitar unless I spend lots of money to try to make it not sound like a guitar. For drums, I just have to have a couple of sticks. That's what, $5, and I can go beat my car. I can hit a log. I could scare birds out of a nest, and I've got all kinds of options for $10. So that's pretty amazing that you can have that natural kind of approach to something, experiment on other things that you've never thought about playing on, and if you're trying to hit a specific sound from a library, you can achieve that too without having that artificial library machine gun effect like Mike and Alex both mentioned.
Another thing that live drums will give you that's really hard to do authentically is fills. You know, loops. I think, you know, if you love groove music and you're into sort of, you know, dance music, you know, it's not that difficult to make a loop that gets your foot tapping. But if you're wanting to create that kind of tension and drama in your drum tracks, you're going to need some decent fills, and fills need a drummer because it's one body. You know, and drummers have just a magic in the way that they work in synchronizing, you know, the different things that they're doing to sort of really, you know, words just can't describe when you're listening to a track and the drummer hits a really, really, really good fill. It just sort of elevates the tension of the music instantly, and that's really, really hard to do if you're programming. It's really, really hard to do unless you're a drummer and you understand. You know, because a lot of the times really good drummers, they don't think about it. Oh, I'm going to put this here and I'll put that there and then I'll do that there and then that here. It's just a feel thing, and that's where the sort of the style and the flair of every individual drummer comes through. And so, yeah, if you find that your music can benefit from really good fills, then you may as well start out with a really good proper drummer, I would say, instead of trying to do it yourself. You spend hours trying to get like a decent fill, whereas a drummer will just rip through it in one take. And then it's like, whoa, that was cool.
Oh, man, and there's so much talent there because over the years, I've taught myself to drum, I don't know, from probably 5 or 6 cars, you know, the steering wheel, and I've practiced for a lot of years through a lot of different cars. But when I sit down in my kit, you know, I'll try to pull off a fill, and I go, I probably should have learned how to play drums rather than just beat a steering wheel. But I'll go to Sam, or I'll go to.
I just had a look at. Everybody, go and have a look at Sam Gallagher's website. Now that, as soon as I saw the photo, I thought, right, I'm getting him for my next project, no question. The guys, look at that picture.
Oh my God! And his studio is beautiful. It's behind their house, and it's this whole building. Pro Tools rig, Ableton, whatever you want, and he's got racks and racks of drums. There's another thing to mention. If you say, it's funny because Native Instruments released a bunch of libraries, 50s drum, 60s drum, 70s drum, because it's important. People want that sound. There are definite different sounds to the manufacturing of the drums in those decades. But with Sam and with Andy, I can go, you know, do you got something from the 60s? And he'll go, or they'll go, yeah, I've got this old Slingerland kit. Let me hook that up. He sets it up. 10 minutes later, he's recording. That's just a beautiful thing. And what's great about their education, not just him, I'm mentioning Sam specifically because you got me thinking about him, but Andy as well, is that, and by the way, to the people who are listening and not seeing, I posted their links in the show, in the chat room, but they will be in the show notes. So we're talking about Andy Gentile and Sam Gallagher. And for Sam, when I was in there hanging out at his studio last time, oh my gosh, it was about the drums, wasn't it? It was about the age of the drum. Oh, is that he knew what sound I wanted before I knew it. So when he started asking me descriptors of what I'm going for, and I was doing more of a rock piece, and this is related to that. I was, you know, started mentioning band names, and they were all over the place as far as decades are concerned. But he knew what kind of sound they had. You know, if you say John Bonham, he knew, you know, John Bonham used acrylic shells. So here's the sound you want. You don't want somebody with birch shells. That's a completely different sound, you know. And so that's the knowledge that they have. Now, in an orchestral world, that knowledge exists as well, obviously, and is somehow, in some weird ways, almost more respected. But I don't know why, because what particular instrumentalists who know their instrument and know the genres and are students of the whole thing, they'll know exactly what it is you're looking for. Or you can spend the time when you're tight on a budget trying to figure out how to get that sound and not knowing that John Bonham uses acrylic shells. There's
also an extension of what Alex was saying earlier about fills that I wanted to run with a little bit. The idea of fills is that you can let your musician improvise or come up with their own embellishment, little details that you might not be able to put together yourself. And this applies equally well to orchestral music, or if you're doing something that's maybe ethnomusical, world music kind of stuff. You can give a drummer a chart and just put hash marks and say ad lib in the following style. You know, pull out your tablas and do something indigenous to Indian folk music, or even if you've got your percussionist with a taiko, you can write out a bar or two, or if you're giving them a MIDI track, play a track or two and say, kind of continue in this vein for 30 seconds. And what you'll get will be much more varied and authentic sounding than if you tried to tap it out yourself on the keyboard, or if you took a taiko loop that might have been recorded from a live performer but was essentially the same thing over and over again. So the fill principle, you know, constrained improvisation, I think it's another powerful benefit that you'll get from using a live drummer or percussionist, and it'll really set your track apart because it'll sound alive in a way that it wouldn't sound if you were using a loop or if you were doing things on a MIDI keyboard.
So I'd definitely like to check out those two guys that you mentioned, Carl, because I mostly do electronic stuff, so obviously I'm all over the synth drum stuff, making my own samples. But the idea of live drums for various applications, it's extremely enticing. However, for somebody like me, I know that recording a drum kit is a highly technical process, and it's not just a case of grabbing my Sony M10 and just like ramming it into a snare drum and hoping that it doesn't clip. It's a really, really complicated process, and to get a good sound that you don't have to spend hours and hours trying to sort of sculpt after it's done because it didn't quite sound right, but getting a good recorded sound straight out of, having somebody that you can pass off to and say, right, I want this kind of sound, these kinds of drums, this kind of playing, and then they'll give that to you recorded extremely well. This sounds extremely attractive to me because it's a scary idea, how do you, like, miking up a drum kit and the kind of microphones and preamps and all of this stuff is really complicated.
So what if I told you that one of the greatest drum sounds in the world by Led Zeppelin, what's it called, the Levy, was recorded with 5 microphones, and that's it. And 2 of those were overheads. What would you say to that?
I would say that's cool because you often get, like a lot of that early, like the James Brown stuff and the Motown as well, I mean, they're recorded with such primitive techniques, and the player knows how to compensate,
So
they know that...
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry about that. 2 of those mics were at the top of a stairwell in a mansion in England, and the other 3 were on the drum set. The entire drum set was recorded with 3 mics, and it's called the Glyn Johns is very famous for his drum miking. So you don't need to have an elaborate setup to record these drums. Now, that's if you're doing it yourself. I just wanted to point that out because it's one of my favorite little factoids. But when the levee breaks, I couldn't think of that at first. But these guys, who we're talking about, and the show turned into kind of a marketing piece for them, but they're just so talented, and it's important to mention that there are people out there that you can lean on. They do all that recording and miking themselves, so you don't have to worry about all that.
Cool.
But you know what? This was a great episode, Alex. Great suggestion.
See, there you go. I mean, drums. Everybody needs them every now and then, and there's a whole wealth of different techniques and tools and resources available.
And talented musicians just itching for a chance to help you with your production and make it sound better.
Yes. Absolutely. And by the way, the stairwell where that was recorded, I'm responding kind of to the chat room. Yeah, oh my God, Matt Uhlman has exactly said Storm Drums 2 and 3, which I thought earlier we have to mention that because I think that Storm Drums 2 and 3 has probably shown up in more game soundtracks than any other drum library ever. But the mansion in which these recordings happened is now there are drum sample libraries now available to you. We're going backwards into our earlier show where we were talking about the value of sample libraries, because there is. It is available to you through a certain company. Can you guys think of who that is right now? There's I can't even think of the name of the mansion, but there's a company that just released a sample library of the recordings in that mansion. You guys, are you familiar with it, or any of the chatties? Can you remember? Because it only came out a little while ago, and I don't think it was East West. I'm not seeing anything in the chat room. Well, anyway, I'll put it in the show notes once I look it up, because it didn't come out that long ago. And yeah, the Grange, Spitfire, Lumina to the rescue. That's exactly what it was. The Grange sound library was recorded in the mansion where so many of my favorite albums were recorded, from Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin and more, to Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis, which is in, I don't know, my top 3 albums of all time, maybe, because Phil Collins is the greatest rock drummer of all time. I just wanted to put that out there for those who think mistakenly that there are other better rock drummers. With that, we should probably wrap up the show, unless I'm keeping you guys from a thought, because I don't want to stop you if you've got something on the back burner there you want to get out.
I think we could do another show on the orchestral side of sample libraries, because we talked a lot about drums, kind of pop drums, and we could easily spin off a part 2 of this topic. It turned out to be, I think, richer and fuller of detail than we might have anticipated at the top of the show.
Yeah,
you're welcome, guys. You're welcome.
It's one of my best ideas.
It's your modesty that we love, Alex. All right, well, friend us on Facebook and tweet us on the Twitters, and follow us on YouTube. We've got a lot of followers. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We've got a lot of subscriptions on YouTube. I throw all those things into a giant folder, and I go, oh my God, people like us. And then I have to get fans out, and grape leaves, or grapes and giant palm leaves, and sit back like an emperor. That's not true. I don't do any of that. But I do appreciate it. I really do, because it lets us know that we're actually doing something that's helpful, because that's the whole point of the show, right? We want to push it forward. In such a competitive world, it makes no sense to any of us, I don't think, if I can speak for the guys, to not share this knowledge and bring up the whole industry. So that's why we do it. So thank you for confirming that and letting us know that we're onto something that's helpful to you, and by following us on Twitter and tweeting us on Facebook and liking us on the YouTubes and whatever you do. So thank you. And thank you, Isotope, for supporting the show. And now we're going to leave. Okay, bye.
Don't keep us hanging, man.
I swear to God, I pushed stop.